you'll have to decide upon your objectives and endpoints. So that is one part of the story. Then once you do your research, you collect a lot of data and you have to manage this data. You have to process this data into a form which is analyzable. Then you have to analyze the data, often with some sort of statistical tests or principles, and then you have to interpret the results of your analysis and then do a discussion on all your findings. And finally, you have to reference your whole body of work. So that would make a complete thesis which you present to your board or university as part of the fulfillment of your curricular requirement. You may even have to defend your thesis during your final university examination. So this thesis business is serious. It takes up a lot of time. And if it's taking up a lot of time, it is worth doing well. And this is what we hope to hear from Dr. Subhrojyoti, who will be carrying you through the nuances of different aspects of doing and publishing a thesis. And then we'll have some time at the end to address your questions on different aspects of this. So over to you, Dr. Bhowmick.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful introduction. At the outset, let me firstly thank Walter Kluis for this great discussion which we are having today on how to write a DNB thesis. On behalf of, I would say that in my current hospital, we have at least 11 DNB programs, and I do help a lot of students to develop their theses. So this entire presentation which you will see is to do with what the experience has been for the last, I would say, 7 years now. So let me pull up my slides. Just let me know if you're able to see my slides. Are you able to see my slides, please?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so we are going to talk about do's and don'ts of DNB thesis writing. And as Professor Hazra was mentioning that what is the thesis? It's actually a written work resulting from the original research, especially the one which is submitted for higher degree in the university. Now, very important in this definition is original research. So it has to be original, done by you, and not a control C, control V kind of a program. And this requires a lot of dedication, because at all university postgraduate medical degree program, whether it is an MD degree program or it is a DNB degree program, they require you to submit your PG at the before you are appearing your PG examination. Your thesis must be submitted, or your dissertation must be submitted for evaluation. And this is considered, as I mentioned, as an obligatory requirement. This also highlights the physician roles as a researcher, because as Professor Hazra was mentioning, that not all of us will go on the path of research. After this, we might just embark on the journey of being pure clinicians. But we have to understand that all the postgraduate medical doctors sometimes in life have to teach somebody. So in that case, this information will definitely come handy. And it's also very important that during this process of thesis writing, you will understand the art of appraisal of new knowledge. Because every time, as we know that medicine is a very dynamic field, every other day new publication is coming in, the new guidelines or evidence is being generated. How do you appraise it? How do you utilize it in your clinical practice? This information can also come from theses. Now, the first question which comes to everybody's mind is, who should select a thesis topic? Is it a guide or is it a student? Now, this has been never answered, because sometimes it's driven by the guide, sometimes the student. I would say it should be by collaboration, because if you have an area of interest, do open up with your guide and tell them that this is an area of interest which I really want to work on. You should always select, don't select a work which is in focus. Don't select outdated work, something which has been done for the last some some technique, some procedure which was used 10 years back. And how do we understand that what is in use in medical science right now in your specialty is to look at publications which have come out in the last 3 years on that particular topic. If you see that the publications are repeatedly coming in that particular topic, so you will understand that there's definitely generation of information and there could be some area which is lacking. Now, it's also very important that you should avoid topics which do not give you adequate modern skills. So this is extremely important. Now, before you begin your thesis, your most important approval has to come from the scientific committee and the institutional ethics committee. So for every DNB institution, we will have to undergo a scientific committee approval, and finally it has to go to the institutional ethics committee. Now, this is mandatory. The institutional ethics committee letter is mandatory to be submitted in the theses, and many a times we have seen that the theses have come back from New Delhi because the mandatory IEC letter has not been put into the theses, and that as an annexure. So the when you are kind of trying to select a topic which interests you for doing your thesis over the next 2 years, always define what is the problem, what is the relevance of this problem, and what information is readily available. So if you would like to work on COVID right now as your thesis topic, it is not going to be a relevant topic because right now COVID-19 is not a problem and there's no relevance of it. And then you will also probably not get hardly any publication. But if you really want to work on, say, if you are in the field of in psychiatry and you have a new antipsychotic drug which has just been launched in the market in schizophrenia, and there are only a couple of publications from India. So schizophrenia is a major problem in the country, and the relevance is that what the certain percentage of schizophrenics still don't get a treatment, proper treatment, and there's a high incidence of tardive dyskinesia on long-term therapy. So you really want to understand that this particular newer antipsychotic, whether it is really efficacious as well as safe in schizophrenic patients in comparison to the plan of care. So now in comparison to the standard care. So this is where your analytical mind has to come in place. So the thesis should have a title page, and this title page also should contain the title of the thesis, a topic which should not be more than 25 words. You must have certificate with signatures, and these signatures will be from starting from the head of the institutions to the head of the department to your thesis guide, to relevant people, including the persons, even in case your co-guides as well. You will have the declaration by the PG that you have done this work extremely honestly, and and you would like to acknowledge a few people. You need to have a certificate from the ethics committee, and then of course you need to mention the contents. Now the contents actually are primarily the introduction of your thesis, the aims and objectives of the study. A very important section is a review of literature, because this adequately, if I would say, a DNB thesis is roughly around 80 to 90 pages, max 100 pages. 30% of your this entire page limit, or 30 pages, or roughly around 25 to 30 pages, will be the review of literature, because now this really talks about how deep, how extensive your thoughts have been. And I think institutions like Walter Kluwer's, they can play a very important role with these softwares which they have, Ovid software, where they can really look through whatever is published and what literature comes handy. And there's a methodology on how you can link, or kind of download linked literature. You then proceed to the materials and methods. I think this is one of the most important section, where you define how the study was performed, what consisted of the inclusion exclusion criteria. You then showcase your results, then you write the discussion part, and very important to write a summary, because some of the thesis reviewers, when thesis comes to me for evaluation, I do some evaluation of the MD thesis. I always go back. I start from behind and then I come in front. So I try to look at the summary, and then I would really look at the bibliography, which is also extremely important. The summary should be followed by conclusion, references, and then Very, very important. The annexures, as Professor Hajra was mentioning, if you have a case report form, that comes as an annexure. If you have an informed consent form, that comes as an annexure. The Gantt charts will come as the annexure. So the cover is, you must have the title in uppercase, ideally Arial. You write the name of the candidate, you write the name of the guides, you write where you have done your DNB from, the name of the institution, and this can, you can use various colors. Very important to acknowledge people who helped you write your theses, and this is extremely important. They could be people who are not your co-guides. They could be your postgraduate, co-postgraduate trainees, and they could be in committee members, assistants received from labs, people who help you in statistical analysis, compilation, library searches. Sometimes it's important to also acknowledge your family and friends, because as we mentioned, this is going to take up a very, very considerable amount of time in your career, and maybe you might not be able to give some time to your family and friends, so you need to acknowledge them. Introduction is a very important part of the thesis. It talks about the description of the general problem, followed by the statement of specific problem and the motivation of the study. So if you look at the 3 points which I've highlighted in red, this is the crux of introduction. What do we know about the topic? Again, going back to the antipsychotic and schizophrenia. So what is known about schizophrenia as a whole, and what do we don't know? And then not only about schizophrenia, when you're trying to talk about the incidence of schizophrenia in India, in your state, in your city, and what are the various pharmacotherapy which is available, what is the gap of knowledge, and what are we now showing, that why do we want to undertake this study. So it builds up a case on what is known on the topic, what is not known on the topic, and why do you want to do the study. The first paragraph should provide a brief background in present tense to establish the context, relevance, nature of the problem, question, and purpose, what is known. The second paragraph to include importance of problem and unclear issues. And final paragraph to state the rationale of doing the thesis, hypothesis, main objective. Now I'm going to take an example of one of our students who is very, he's graduated from our institution, and I took permission from him to show his thesis, which was accepted by the National Board in New Delhi. So if you look at his introduction, this was a DNB orthopedic surgery student, and he passed in one go. His thesis was accepted in one go. He talks about what is known about humerus. He talks about what kind of fractures happens in humerus, and then he talks about significant evolution has happened in the management of humeral shaft fractures over the years. Various modification has been involved, various kinds of techniques are involved, but then he wants to also focus down on his study. Now, coming to the second part of thesis is a review of literature. It is the assessment of the body of research that addresses the research question. It throws light on what we know about the topic, what we don't know, and why did we did the study. Now, this is extremely important that the review of literature should be thorough. We must look into the traditional text, publications, recent publication, and tabulate these references. Now, I must tell you that, I'm sure Ramya is going to talk about these softwares which are available for readily helping you download this. So in a good thesis, you might have 80, 90 references, sometimes very, very time taxing, and it takes a lot of toll on your mind. So start referencing from the beginning. Start referencing from the beginning. Many people say that, okay, once I write, then I will reference. Don't do that, because it is going to take up a lot of time. There is various net sites and portals. In fact, we can have a session on how to the literature search. But today I'm constrained on time. I'm going to just rush through. These are the few websites which you can look at for looking at your literature: PubMed, Medline, Google Scholar. Of course, we will talk about various other tools, and like the Ovid tool, which is available from Walter Kluwer, on how it can help develop your review of literature. Now, this is a review of literature. If you see, it starts all the way from 1600 BC and to this students going up to what is published as early as 1950. So many people believe that review of literature should be for the last 5 years. No, when you're writing a thesis, it should be about the very early information which is available in your domain knowledge, and then build up the story subsequently to what is known maybe as recent as last month, if that is actually possible. Now, research objectives. Let me tell you that many students who come to me, they have multiple objectives for theses. That is not correct, because each study should have at least one primary objective. How would you understand that whether your thesis has achieved the outcome of interest, whether this antipsychotic drug really worked well? So you must have one particular schizophrenia scale or one particular index to figure out, a scale to figure out that whether this is better than the standard of care. If you have multiple objective elements, this is possible with secondary objectives. As I mentioned, we can have multiple secondary objectives, but primary objectives should be one, because the sample size is always calculated on basis of primary objective. Now, I'm not going to get into details how do we calculate sample size, because this could be a session in itself, but it's another very important topic in materials and methods, is how do you calculate sample size. And then many good hospitals, including us, we have a statistician who can actually help you looking at your primary objective, what the sample size would be. So if you look at this particular student thesis, once again going back to the student thesis, he looked at his aim of the study was to bring out certain facts which will help in assessing the functional outcome of interlocking nail osteosynthesis for diaphyseal fractures of humerus in adults. So his primary objective was to study the functional outcome of diaphyseal fracture of humerus treated by closed interlocking nails in skeletally mature patient. And then he looked at the secondary objective, and these are 5 secondary objectives he looked at. The materials and methods section talks about how detailed the study was. The detailed methodology is described here. It gives sufficient details, but it is not expected to write like a laboratory manual. You have to also describe control groups. So if there is a test group, what is the control group, and highlight critical steps and precautions which are taken. So if you look at the materials and methods section written by this student, he mentions the study areas, the study period, the sample size. He talks about the study population, the sample design, patient selection, inclusion criteria, exclusion criteria. So this is very exhaustive, and in terms of how the study was performed and where the study was performed, for how long. So it was performed between October 2020 to May 2021. The results section is another very important section, should be very concise, and results, people have a tendency to, write a lot in results. Don't do that. It should include what was found, mentioning the level of significance and other information. And extremely important that we use tables and graphs, and they should not duplicate each other. So what I mean by that, that many times I see that tables are well presented, and then you also have a graph, and subsequently for that particular data. Don't do it, because that is not going to help you. Tables should be numbered in Arabic numericals. Each table should have a comprehensive heading. Every table should have a heading. They should begin on the next line after table, so table number headings, and it should be at least 12 font size and should be bold. And the level of significance in table should be mentioned with a star, which shows P should be less than 0.05, and this is with Times New Roman. So I'll go back to the student again. So if you see that the table has to be so what was the age distribution of the patient? These are the age distribution of the patient. What was the frequency and what was the percentage? In terms of whether, what was the final outcome, moderate, poor, good, excellent, and then whether the p-value which came out, whether it was significant or not significant. In this case, it was 0.001, which was significant in nature. Figures should not duplicate tables. I've already mentioned that. It should be numbered in Arabic numericals. Each figure should be a legend written below. It should have a legend written below in Times New Roman, and should have a font size 12. The units should be all numbered in SI units. So length should be, so if you are using length, you must use meters. Time should be seconds. Frequency should be expressed in cycles per second. Now, coming to another very important section is the discussion of theses. Now, It is an attempt to describe what the study found with the possible reasons of finding. Now, many times what people do is they just write the results again in discussion. That is not what is required in discussion. In discussion, you will have to figure out some salient results and compare them with your review of literature, similar results to compare the similar results from previously published study, and maybe give one or two possible reasons. And if you have dissimilar results, so in your study, if you find that the newer antipsychotic was found to be less efficacious, why do you think it was less efficacious? Was it the time duration for use was less? Maybe in another study done in America, they had used it for 24 weeks, whereas in your study, you have used it for 12 weeks. So that could be one of the reasons why the results have come dissimilar. Now, another very important thing is we must mention weaknesses and strengths of our study. This is something which is missing in the discussion part. We never mention this. So, weaknesses, and it's extremely important that we must mention what are the weaknesses. So, there, this is the discussion part, and here in this the study, it talks about this is a nice way of putting what your study found and what other studies have found. So these are studies performed previously, which have been compared. So study performed in 1995 through 2018, and the present study was performed in 2021. And these are the mean age, and these are the number of patients. So the thesis evaluator understands that you understand the meaning of discussion. You have comparing the previous studies with what you have found. The summary section should ideally be standalone, and what this means is that if anyone reads it, they would be able to understand why the study was done. And let me tell you, my dear students, and that this is one of the sections which is read for the by the very busy theses adjudicators initially, because they will look at the aims, methods, background, results, implication, drawbacks, and direction for future use. So this is again the summary section of the student who clearly mentions about what kind of prospective study was done in 36 adults, what was the time duration, where it was done, what are the salient features. So, and he goes on to mention, so in our study we found that antegrade humeral nailing is an effective method of treatment for shaft humerus. So this is as concise as it can get, not more than a single page. Conclusions are brief, they are generalized statements in answer to general and in specific questions if possible. These contain generalized in relation to population. Now, conclusion also must be flexible, because you cannot draw a far-flung proposition, but conclusions may be used to generalization, and you can say a larger study is required to extrapolate these findings for the greater population. So this is the conclusion of that particular thesis which was accepted. And I think the last, I'll just quote from the last paragraph, which says that with correct anatomical knowledge, preoperative planning, and good surgical techniques and post-operative rehabilitation, antegrade interlocking humeral nailing is a viable option in the management of humeral shaft humerus fracture, promising excellent outcome. We hope that in days to come, through continued medical research, further refinement in nail designs and surgical techniques is possible, offering mankind a better quality of life. So you can jolly well understand that they are looking at the future, not drawing too far flung, big things and mentioning that this will happen or that will happen, but a very nice way to end that yes, by improving the nail design, the better quality care could be served. The once you have this is another very important chart, and this comes as an annexure, is a Gantt chart. The entire database of your study comes in Gantt chart, and a chart in which series of horizontal lines shows the amount of work done or production completed in a certain period of time. So it is extremely important that you definitely mention Gantt chart for your thesis. This has to come in, I would say in your thesis, and at least all your data and how it was captured must be there in the Gantt chart for the thesis. This is a small tip which I would like to give you, is that you should actually keep at least 1.5 years for your thesis preparation, because you're initially before your scientific committee, you get 3 months. So have a draft proposal. Then once you get the ethics committee approval, get a quarterly progress report, do your thesis guide every 6 months. Then every 3 months, you must have a preliminary protocol with grand chart, and final draft dissertation should be ready before 7 months before the exam, and the final dissertation should be ready 6 months before the exam. So it's don't pull it to the last minute, because I've seen many people suffering by the time when they are trying to do in the last minute. It really hampers the quality. Last but most important section is the references. We know that the Vancouver style of referencing is to be accepted. It talks about the full title, author, place of publication, publisher, and the date of publication from its source. So these are the references which are given by these students. And let me tell you, if your references are not correct, I've seen very unfortunately theses come back to to the institution as well as to the student just before the exam. So an ideal thesis should be sound, should be well written, should be presented well, should be accurate and complete. Before I end, I would say that what are the theses reviewers are looking for? So I asked few of the DNB examiners, and they gave us these tips that they actually look at your review of literature. Is the literature relevant? Now, as I mentioned, if your literature is some literature in 2023, but you have forgotten to include it, be sure that your thesis is coming back. Is the review critical or just descriptive? Is it comprehensive? Does it link to the methodology in the thesis, and does it summarize the essential aspect? Now, this is extremely important that some results have to come in the summary as well, and it has to be very, very. You cannot have a summary for 5 pages. And the theses, the reviewers are also looking at your methodology section in terms of a clear hypothesis. You cannot have multiple primary objectives. Are the limitations identified? Is the data collected appropriately? Is the methodology justified? Results have to be properly presented. Data has to be properly analyzed. Take a help of a statistician if you can't do it yourself, and patterns identified and summarized. Discussion and conclusion sections are important because everybody wants to understand what the limits of your research, what you couldn't identify, what could have been done if you had better time and more resources, what links are there to the literature, is there a theoretical development and other speculations well grounded. So before I end, I would like to talk about this particular organization. Sometimes people find it very difficult to write their own literature, to publish their own literature. So you have institutions like 3md.in who can actually help you in biostatistical analysis and manuscript support. You can visit the website because they do a lot of original research, article development, and publication. They also help you to write your systematic review and meta analysis. And this is an example of a systematic review which was developed for a dermatology doctor. They just given the data, and a lot of information was pulled in from at least 100 articles, and this was developed. So to summarize my presentation, I would say that DNB thesis writing is strategic and it requires a plan of action. Selection of an interesting topic and working on review of literature is the initiation. So talk to your guide, keep talking to your guide. This is very important. That bond is very, very important. Study synopsis must be approved by the institutional scientific and ethics committee. And this letter is extremely vital because this letter is going to be there as one of your annexures. Objectives must be clear. Primary objective should be one. Results should be documented properly. Discussion must specify the strength and weakness of your research. If you don't write the strength and the weakness, be sure that your thesis might just come back from the DNB board in Delhi. Summary page is a snapshot of your work. Conclusion must be clear and must specify the future direction of work. So I would say that thesis defense is all about being courageous and telling the examiner that yes, we are here to face it. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'm sure there will be some questions. So over to Ramya, and of course over to Professor Hazra for more discussion.
Over to you, sir. Avijit, sir. Sir, you are on mute. Kindly unmute yourself.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sir.
So thank you, Dr. Subhro, for taking us through an overview of this topic of DNB thesis writing, which I think is not limited to DNB thesis. It can be generalized to any postgraduate medical thesis. Now, as I understand from your presentation, there are actually three broad domains to this whole business. One is, of course, the scientific part. In writing a thesis, you have to identify a well-defined research question and then try to pick up the particular knowledge gaps that you're trying to address. The scientific part would, of course, include choosing a proper study design, choosing the correct methodology, choosing the correct objectives and endpoint, doing the correct data analysis, and finally interpreting the data. The scientific part, of course, is a large part of the thesis, and it helps you in understanding the nuances of the topic. But again, you have another broad domain is the logistical domain. When you are doing some work, whether it is based upon clinical material, whether it is based upon animal studies, whether it is based on laboratory-based analysis, you have to do a lot of logistical arrangements, arranging for equipment, arranging for money, and all this has to be done in a time-bound manner. Unfortunately, in the Indian setting, although there are some bodies which will fund your thesis to some extent, but you don't have any overarching support. So if you are in an institution which can provide funds for your thesis, you are lucky. But the great majority of our students, DNB students or MDMS students, they are in institutions where they do not have dedicated funds for doing the research. So this logistical aspect consumes a lot of your time and effort. And the third domain is the writing and communication part. So right from formatting the text, putting in the correct tables, putting in the correct sort of diagrams, making the whole presentation visually appealing, and then arranging all the necessary accessory documents which you mentioned in the annexes, be it the ethics committee approval, be it the informed consent documents, be it appendices related to detailed methodology, or be it the master chart, all the raw data of your study so that your data can be independently analyzed and verified. And you have to present it in a format which is acceptable to your university, and at the same time make sure that you can make out a worthwhile paper out of it. So I'll request all the students who are there that don't keep your thesis just as a thesis limited to a university. Always try to publish it, if not in full, at least part of it which could be of use to the wider scientific community. Now, this writing and communication part also involves correct referencing, something that we need time to get acclimatized to, although there are a lot of technological tools that can help us with referencing. And one more aspect I must remind all the younger people in this audience is that nowadays there is plagiarism checking. Many universities have made it mandatory that your thesis will undergo plagiarism check. So the writing cannot be a simple copy paste from different sources. It would be easily detected by technology. And there is even greater danger. All of us have access to ChatGPT like tools which we can use to shorten our work, but then this will severely compromise the originality of our writing and presentation. So there's three domains: the scientific domain, the logistical domain, and this writing and communication domain must come together appropriately to make a good thesis. So I'd like to emphasize that for a beginner, this is difficult task, definitely a difficult task. So it's very important to find yourself a good guide, a good mentor, and take advice and the help of the mentor as far as possible. But again, we are hamstrung by the fact that many of our mentors are also busy clinicians and they may not be able to give as much time as we would like them to do. But then it is our responsibility that if we are sincere and definite, that our supervisors and mentors will also reciprocate that sincerity. So these are the summary words, and Then over to Ramya.
Thank you, Dr. Subhrojyoti, for such an informative session. And Dr. Avijit, sir, thank you so much for summarizing our whole presentation in a very crisp and clear manner. So thank you to both of you. So I could see few questions, and I hope, Dr. Avijit, you have cleared them all in the chat window.
No, we have not answered the questions yet. Yes, we said we'll do it at the
Sir,
end.
Okay.
You have a
Okay.
presentation, right? So we can do it at the
Yes.
end. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So thank you for this. So as I discussed earlier, we will showcase you about the Ovid e-resources for the DNB education, which is aligned as per the NBE guidelines. So let me quickly pull up my slides. Okay. I hope am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Perfect. Okay, so Wolters Kluwer, a 5.6 billion company, provides innovative solutions, as in trusted clinical technology, wide range of online medical e-resources, databases, and effective decision-making that drive effective decision-making across the healthcare. In the Wolters Kluwer, we have our Ovid, which is one of the world's most trusted medical research platform, which Dr. Subhrojyoti did highlight during the presentation. So it's the world's most trusted online research platform for more than 30 years now. And it delivers, a different type of solution. One is the content solution. So content solution means there is an access to hundreds and millions of medical and nursing full text journals, ebooks, databases. We also do provide high impact factor journals and the premier society and association journals like the New England Journal of Medicine, ASN journals, the Journal of Clinical Oncology Digital Library, AASLD, CNS, and many more. Apart from the content solution, we also provide the workflow solutions. So workflow solutions actually help you to curate, organize, and disseminate various information that to evidence-based solutions in your institute.
Ramya, are you speaking? Because we can't hear you.
Okay, I don't know how come I am getting. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, better. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So in the Ovid platform, as I did mention, that we are providing various content solutions, we are providing workflow solutions and certain medical education programs solutions as well. So the Ovid, which is the medical research platform, not only provides, but it also aggregates some top evidence-based content from multiple providers, and it actually provides a common interface to search all of them. You just name any, for example, the Embase database, the JBI databases, the EBMR, Cochrane, Medline, NEJM, anything you want to search, the evidence-based content is freely available here. And that too, you need not to waste time on, searching these evidence-based content from multiple providers. Rather, you just come to a platform and you will get it in a single platform. Coming over to my next slide, I would like to highlight that, there are, I hope I'm audible. Yes. So the OVID platform, as I said, not only provides the content solutions or the workflow solutions or the medical education solutions, but we have a vast digital library of exclusive and, cost-effective, high-impact research journals, whether you are from the medicine field, nursing, or any fields of healthcare from the lipid cord. So we provide almost or more than, like, say, 300 plus essential research journals, more than 150 plus lipid cord proprietary journals, and yes, more than 110 plus premier society and association journals. So if I would also like to highlight that the New England Journal. Yes. So this is one of the slides I would like to highlight about the exclusivity of providing the New England Journal group of journals exclusively on OVID. So we have we have access to all the 4 journals, whether it is NEJM, the flagship title with a high impact factor of 176. We have NEJM Evidence, we have NEJM Catalyst, and also NEJM Journal Watch, which is very important for all the clinicians to prepare and practice with confidence. Apart from all these 4 journals, we also do provide the NEJM archives starting from 1812. So yes, next time, if you want to search anything which is high quality, if you want to have evidence-based solutions or evidence-based content, I would just request you all to come to the OVID platform, have a look and feel about the platform, go through various journals, ebooks, databases that we provide here. So that's all from my end. To know more about the OVID e-resources, I'll be sharing a quick feedback link on the chat window. So if you want to know more about any of these e-resources, please feel free to fill up the form. That's it from my end. Over to you, Dr. Subhrojyoti and Dr. Hazra. We may take the questions now. Dr. Subhrojyoti and Dr. Avijit.
Yes. Dr. Shubha, there are some questions in the chat box. Would you like to start with them?
Yeah, sir, we can start. I'm just trying to figure out. Yeah. Yeah, so basically, I'm just going from below. So one of the doctor mentions, okay, that can a timeline for thesis be 1 year? So as per the DNB, if you're a primary candidate, you actually have 3 years in training, of which DNB is very clear that in the last 6 months, your thesis should be submitted. So you actually have 2.5 years for your thesis to be done. Having said that, if you take admission if once you've taken admission, in the first 90 days, your thesis topic should be fixed. So scientific committee meeting should happen within the 90 days of your admission. So that leaves you somewhere between 90 days after your admission till 2.5 years. In 2.5 years, as I mentioned, if we keep the 2.5 years for thesis submission, you probably had roughly around 2 years for your thesis. I would say that 1 year for thesis, you can have it, but you will have to justify why would you like to go for a 1 year timeline. It becomes difficult for the secondary candidates, because secondary candidates come in for 2 years and then they literally get, I would say they actually are the people who get 1 year or sometimes less than 1 year. So they do it for 6 months to 9 months. But for a primary candidate, I would say that you must have your thesis work done, as I've calculated and shown you. at least somewhere between 18 months to 20 months, preferably I would say 24 months if that is possible. That should be it. So next, should I take the question, sir?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. So next question is one of the doctors asking, while writing the review of literature, what all subheadings should we write from that study? Now, I won't say about subheading. When we are writing the review of literature, and I'll give you the example. Say you are doing, pleural effusion, and the lactic acid level in the pleural effusion, and figuring out their correlation with tuberculosis. So you must actually find out what all has been published in TB pleural effusion and in correlation. First, about how common is pleural effusion in TB chest, and then what all biochemical parameters have been studied, and in which what is the prevalence of lactic acid level in this pleural effusion in the tuberculosis patients vis-a-vis pleural effusions from other resources. So I won't say subheading, but it could be when you are trying to figure out the review of literature, look at number one, at least have as I mentioned, have a chronology of review of literature, starting from what is tuberculosis, what was known about the complication of tuberculosis, as in like, pleural effusion. The paper might have come out in 1980s or 1990s, but if there has been some study which had looked at lactic acid and a correlation of tuberculosis, then that can be published as early as 1995, but that comes in the review of literature. So it is more contextual on what you are trying to study in your thesis. So I won't say there will be subheadings. I mean, I can take there are no subheadings in review of literature. Review of literature is actually a chronology of research, how it has evolved over a period of time, and what information has been added on that particular chronology. And if there is some information missing, that can also come in the review of literature.
Now, I just like to add to this that
Please.
in the review of literature, we also try to add some details of techniques, equipment, or drugs that we'll be using in our work. Sometimes these details, rather than putting it in the methodology and definitely not in the introduction, we put it in the review of literature. So in addition to the evolution of the research question, what is already known on the topic, what are the gaps, which gaps you're trying to address, we can put in some details of methods, equipments, or techniques. But there is really no set format for a review of literature. Whatever you feel contextual, whatever you feel is relevant to understanding your study, that can come in the literature review.
Right, sir. So next is what type of studies is thesis generally, like whether it's a case control or cohort study. So it completely depends on you, whether you want to do a retrospective study, you want to do a prospective study. Within the prospective study, do you want to do a randomized control trials? Usually I would say it is better to avoid randomized control trials in a thesis scenario, because it has lot of regulatory responsibilities. So it totally depends on you and your thesis guide on what kind of thesis study will you select. The study design can also depend on, if you're a secondary candidate and you only have, say for example, you joined in late and you only have like 18 months for completion of your training, and you only have like 12 months before you can submit a thesis. In that scenario, a retrospective study design is also preferable. So it's not that, but of course, if you do a retrospective study design, you have to ensure that the data is present, and you can access the data, and you can actually draw a meaningful inference from the data. So there is nothing called an ideal study design for a thesis or a dissertation. Ideal method to mention for
I'll just add
randomization.
to this,
Yeah.
Dr. Shubhro.
Yeah.
As you have said that there is no ideal method. It depends upon your research question, what kind of resources you have. If you leave aside animal studies or totally in vitro studies, laboratory-based studies, when we speak about clinical studies, we can broadly categorize them as clinical trials and as observational studies. Now, clinical trials, as you just said, have a lot of ethical and legal requirements surrounding them, even for non-sponsored academic clinical trials. So we should go into clinical trials if we are absolutely sure that we'll be able to handle all these additional responsibilities. For instance, if you are doing a clinical trial anywhere in India, irrespective of what kind of study or what kind of setting, you have to get the clinical trial registered with Clinical Trial Registry India. So these regulatory requirements are there. If you are doing observational studies, either you can do purely descriptive studies, which are easier to do, or you can do analytical observational studies like your cross-sectional studies, case control studies, and cohort studies. Now, scientifically speaking, if you take up observational studies, then the gold standard for clinical epidemiology would be cohort studies. But unfortunately, cohort studies are also the longest, and your thesis submission timelines may not allow you to do a proper cohort study. So in that case, you'll have to think of addressing the same research question through a case control design or through a cross-sectional design. And some studies are in the nature of surveys, where maybe you try to find out the incidence or prevalence of a particular disorder or problem and to present the clinical profile of cases in your setting. So these can be done in a shorter time interval and maybe easier to complete. So again, as I am saying, that you have to balance the science part and the logistics part and the writing part.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. So there is no fixed formula. And again, I would say it has to go back to the discussion from your thesis guide. I did not clearly understand the next question is ideal method to mention for randomization in thesis. I think randomization will come in the materials and methods. Randomization usually done through computer generated randomization tables, which we use generally, but what is meant by, so maybe I'll ask Professor Hazra to answer this, ideal method to mention for randomization in theses. I'm not getting the meaning of this question, though, of course, any light on this question.
There are different techniques of randomization: simple randomization, block randomization, stratified randomization. This is not determined by the fact that you're doing a thesis, rather it's determined by your study design and your research question. So different techniques of randomization would be appropriate for a particular research question which you are trying to address. Simple randomization is the simplest, but every technique has its own pros or cons. Cluster randomization would be more difficult, but then it may be needed in some circumstances.
Okay, so the next question is a $1 million question. How many studies should we write in review of literature? Professor Hazra, how many studies? I have no answer to this. I would say the most relevant should come. It should have in a chronological format, and the most relevant. You should not miss something which has come out in the last 3 years, is what my take is. Professor
Exactly.
Hazra.
Unless we are trying to highlight some historical aspects of the topic that you are trying to address, you should keep your review of literature manageable lengths, and accordingly the referencing would be kept to manageable proportions. So the idea would be to keep the most relevant references, to keep the more recent references. You have mentioned 3 years. I'll expand it a bit. Let's say 5 years. We can go back to 5 years, and if possible, avoid references older than that. And we should avoid redundancy of references. For instance, if I am doing a thesis on a particular drug which has been found to be effective in XYZ condition, and there are 10 studies which are showing that it is effective, I did not reference all 10. Maybe 2 or 3 of the most recent studies would serve my purpose. So again, we cannot put in straitjacket figures that the review of literature must be supported by at least 10 references or 50 references. I'm not aware that universities also have some limitations, but papers definitely do. Original research papers won't allow you to put in, let's say, more than 20, 25, 30 references. Although in a paper, you don't write a review of literature section separately. you incorporate it into your introduction and materials and methods. So in thesis, we don't have any prescribed limits, but we should keep our referencing to manageable proportions and concentrate on the more relevant references and the more recent references.
Right, absolutely. Most recent and most relevant. So we'll go to Dr. Devi's question now. Can you please guide once again regarding summary? Yes, Dr. Devi. She asked about how it is different from results. So, Dr. Devi, in results, we only focus on what results we got. What was, what did our study figure out? So, with the help of tables and figures, we represent results. But in summary, it's like, as I mentioned, it's like a snapshot of how the introduction, why the study was done, and then how the study was done, or something on your materials and methods, and some salient points on your results. And then you actually mentioned whether a couple of lines which was the strength and your weakness of your study, and then you maybe write a sentence or a couple of them on what is the future looking like. So it should not be more than a page. The summary should not be more than a page, and this is much more to do from just the results.
So Dr. Anjushri Devi had one more question. Can we make few corrections for the mistakes done in protocol?
And when do you want to make? Yeah, when do you want to do this? Change. Can we make few corrections or mistakes done in the protocol? So ideally, the DNB protocol is finalized and they have a copy of it. If you are changing the study design, it depends on what kind of correction, Dr. Anjushri, you're talking about. If these are, minor corrections, they don't mind. But if you are changing the study design, if you are changing the study data collection methodology, then it is better to write to the thesis section of DNB and letting them know, because these are major changes. So major changes can bring in problem, because when you get an acceptance letter, initially when we have to send the scientific committee and the thesis, the institutional ethics committee letter, and along with your thesis topic, the thesis topic is fixed. Unless it is a major change, you are allowed to do the change with some information being given to the DNB board. But if you're changing it massively, a retrospective study is suddenly becoming prospective, then I think you would need to be in touch with the DNB National Board in New Delhi.
So one question, I can see how many losses to follow up are permissible. Shall I take it up?
Yes, please take it up, please.
Okay, so you see that whenever we do clinical research, there is always the possibility that a certain proportion of our subjects, study subjects, will be lost to follow. So sometimes we jokingly say only the anesthesiologists and the forensic people are lucky, their cadavers or their patients can't run away. All apart, you have to account for losses to follow. Now, again, there are no fixed guidelines. When we do a sample size and power calculation, the convention is that our study must have a sample size adequate to achieve 80% power. So 80% probability of correctly rejecting the null hypothesis when it is false. And so we determine the sample size, and then we, keeping in mind the anticipated loss to follow up, the anticipated dropouts, we adjust the sample size. So we have some correction factors. If you are anticipating 10% loss, then the sample size has to be multiplied by the correction factor 1.11. If we are anticipating 20% loss, we multiply it by 1.25. So, and if you look at these tables, then they give you correction factors for 5% dropout, 10% dropout, 15, 20, 25, 35, then they stop at 40. And if you lose more than 40% of your patients, then there is something seriously wrong either in your research question or the way you are conducting your study. But jokes apart, so in typical circumstances, when we have patients whom we have to call for follow-up, and the follow-up would be in a time frame which will be measured in months rather than weeks, then minimum we should keep 10 to 20% dropout factor in our study. That means we do a sample size calculation and then inflate it for an anticipated 10 to 20% loss.
Right, so I think we have addressed all these questions.
There are some COVID-related questions, which I think Ramya has already answered out there.
Yes, sir.
She's also requested that people who are more interested in these products, they can fill up a form.
We have a participant from Bangladesh, Dr. Arman Reza. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
And he has asked, how can we improve our writing quality? Dr. Shubhro, how can we improve our writing quality?
I think we need to,
also
Dr. Reza, Dr. Reza, it is about practice, practice, and practice. There is nothing called a perfect quality of writing or the perfect draft. It is all about practice. And I would say when you start publishing, publish with somebody who has published more than you, somebody senior. So I will tell you with my personal experience, when I started publishing with Dr. Avijit Hazra. He was one of the best writers I know of. So, and then we kind of refined, and you learn every draft gets refined, and you kind of understand that this is just like a cooking recipe. Every time, next time you prepare the dish, it is going to be better. You might add some more spice, make it some more spicier, better. So practice and practice and practice, and keep to one or two more seasoned, experienced people who will be there to write with you and give you feedbacks. And I'll also tell you that if you're talking about writing quality, then rejections from journal is also, they teach us a lot on how to improve writing, because many times the journals, they reject you because your quality is not good, but then they give you good constructive feedback. Always work on those constructive feedback to improve writing.
So Ramya, it is finally over to you.
I see, sir, one question. I'm sorry, I see a question. My protocol was submitted almost 8 to 9 months. Now, how will this impact my thesis and final exam? So I will not be able to answer this question because I don't know when. Sorry. So I don't know, Dr. K, when were you admitted and whether, what is the status, but I can tell you, please keep in touch with the DNB Thesis Board. For them, you are just a roll number because there are thousands of such students in India, but for you, this is your only thesis. So keep in touch, try speaking to them. They have helpline numbers, try speaking to them, keep in touch through emails. And definitely, as you know, we know that if the guidelines have now changed 24 hours, 24 months of joining, your clock is already ticking. So continue your thesis work, but do keep on the communication with New Delhi at the National Board.
So I can see one more question.
Right.
Are the page count and other writing guidelines strictly followed in DNB? Is what the question is.
So my experience has been that average page between 80 to 90 is the average page number. They are not very strict upon that, but then they're more strict on the sections. But having said that, you can't have a review of literature for 3 pages and a result section for 45 pages. That is not going to help you. So it has to be adequately and judiciously used, but roughly a good thesis should be 80 to 100 pages, somewhere between 80 to 100 pages. And writing guidelines, yes, they are very strict about putting your ethics committee approval letter, your Gantt chart. If you don't have your Gantt charts, your CRFs, case report forms, they might send it back to you. Even your materials and methods not written properly. So I've seen people where theses have come back where their materials and methods section was not clearly mentioned. Yeah.
So there are two more questions. Is plagiarism checker in NBE?
For sure, yes, because you are submitting your thing now. It is actually the soft copy has to be uploaded. So yes, they check the plagiarism checker, and as Professor Hajra was mentioning, that there are artificial intelligence tools which can check whether which portion has been picked up from Chat GPT as well. So we have tools now to pick that thing up as well.
So I can see one last question, I guess, that whether there is a need to attach performa with thesis.
Yes. Yes. Answer is absolutely yes.
Great. Okay. So I think, sir, we have covered all the questions. So thank you, Dr. Subhrojyoti and Dr. Avijit, for sharing your expertise, insights. I would say that, the presentation was truly informative and engaging. Since I could see so many questions, so I am sure that the session was really great. So, oh, I can still see some questions coming in. Sir, can we cover those since we have a minute more? What is the one spacer print in the last mixture?
I'm not sure about what do you mean by one spacer print. Maybe Dr. Hazra, you would like to answer this. One
No,
spacer
no,
print.
no,
I'm not aware of this. What is
I've
one
not
spacer?
understood the question either.
Yeah. And last, I know about these annexures should be, you must have few annexures, which is I mentioned, the ethics committee approval letter. You must have your CRFs, your informed consent form, your Gantt chart as the annexure, but I'm not sure about given in the protocol, Well, these are essential, Dr. AK, these are essential, but I'm not aware of the one spacer printing, what you're talking about. Can I approach journal for publication before my thesis submission to NBE? Answer is no. This is not a good practice because I think your thesis is primarily your research work done in dissertation, and I think they need to firstly ratify it, accept it. Good suggestion will be once you pass the exam, then you then you kind of go for a publication. Professor Hazra, your thoughts, please.
Uh, it differs. I mean, I know of universities, I'm not going to name them, where they actually encourage that your paper should be sent for publication. And now the National Medical Commission in its new postgraduate guidelines is also encouraging that postgraduate students send their work for publication. And the most important work they do during their studentship is, of course, writing out the thesis. But some boards or some universities may have different rules. So you have to sort it out at the local level. But of course, once your thesis is accepted, it's already a publication in the name of the university. The university or the board has the copyright. But then it is also understood that you are now free to go in for academic publication.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So you, Dr. AK, you're asking two annexures print in one page. Why would you like to do it? You can use one more page. They are not so strict to kind of, you can go green after you've
You
published
stay
it.
on the page. Nowadays, you don't need to print. You are sending the soft copies. No?
Soft copy. That is what I'm saying. So just don't do two annexures in print in one page. They might lose or they might figure out that you might not have done it. So better not to take a chance. Okay, Ramya, I think this is it
That's it,
for
sir.
today.
So for
Yeah.
all the attendees over here, if you want to have more such, informative webinars, please do fill the form provided in the chat box and let us know that and we will organize the next session with you all. So thank you once again, Dr. Subhrojyoti and Dr. Avijit Hazra. I would request you all to, yeah, okay, yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, sir.
you.
Have a great
Thank,
evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you, everyone. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.